In the cold, far northern seas of Europe, where the sun rises for only a few hours in the winter and never sets in the summer, there is a small village called Husøy, isolated between the mountains and the fierce waves of Norway. There, the lives of fishermen are closely linked to the sea, a place of livelihood, a place of challenge, and also a place where many generations have memories. On a January morning, with the north wind blowing fiercely and snow covering the roof, Lars, a 47-year-old fisherman, woke up at 3 a.m. He is the fourth generation of his family to work at sea. Since childhood, Lars has been familiar with the sound of waves, the sound of ships' engines, and long nights on the ice. His body is as hard as the rocks offshore, and his eyes always shine with the determination of someone who has faced hundreds of storms in the cold Atlantic. Lars and his son Emil, 22, prepare for a 4-day voyage. They fish with bottom trawls, a giant fishing gear that can catch dozens of tons of fish in a single haul, but requires precision and experience to operate. Their boat, the Havind, is nearly 30 meters long, has a heated cabin, a satellite navigation system and a cold storage room to preserve the fish at sea. Before leaving the dock, Lars stood silently in front of the stone statue of his grandfather, a fisherman who went missing in a storm in 1957. He always believed that the sea has a soul, and that those who lived and died with it are still here. In every wave, the trip began in the dark. There were only 4 people on the boat: Lars, Emil, Henrik, a tough 48-year-old from a neighboring village, and Jorgen, a cook and mechanic. The night sea was as black as ink. Only the light from the cabin reflected on the water. The boat glided through the waves, heading for a fishing area 90 nautical miles offshore, once famous for its giant schools of cod. Arriving at the position, Lars stood at the main control. With expert skill, he operated the netting system. The giant net, 180 meters long and more than 10 meters high, was released from the stern of the ship, pulling 2 large steel doors that kept the mouth of the net open on the seabed. Emil and Henrik checked the pressure, depth and speed of the pull on the touchscreen in the auxiliary control room. As the net touched bottom, Havind moved slowly into the wind, maintaining a speed of 2.5 knots. Every meter of the seabed was scoured, collecting cod, flounder, herring, depending on the season and the current. Henrik monitored the sonar system and the seabed camera. There's a big sign. The school is moving southeast, he shouted over the radio. Lars adjusted the direction of the pull, making the most of every minute. 4 hours later, when the net was pulled up, the sea suddenly exploded with the sound of fish splashing. The whole deck lit up. Tons of cod, the most prized fish in northern Europe, were dumped onto the deck using hydraulic cranes. Emil and Henrik used scythes to size the fish, while Jorgen was down in the cold storage operating the conveyor belt that carried the fish into the deep freeze. After processing, Lars let the ship drift freely for a few hours. The crew dined on hot halibut soup and toasted black bread. Jorgen told them ghost stories at sea, about a ghost ship that had appeared in the fog near Iceland. Emil listened attentively, his eyes lighting up. Even though he was born in modern times, he still believed in the old stories of his father and grandfather. On the second day, the wind started to pick up. Waves as high as 5 meters made the ship rock violently. Operating the net became dangerous. But Lars decided to drop the net anyway because the sonar signal showed a school of fast-moving fish near the seabed. The team tied their safety ropes, put on life jackets and worked in the cold wind of -15 degrees Celsius. A small mistake could see them swept into the sea in an instant. When they pulled up the net, Henrik discovered a torn section of the net, most likely due to a reef. They had to stop and mend it in the middle of the sea. Emil hung on the rig, holding a plasma torch, trying to weld the steel frame inside the net. The waves were crashing, the snow was falling heavily, but no one complained. They knew that no one could help them but themselves. On the second night, Havin dropped anchor in the calm sea near the Lofoten Islands. The brilliant aurora appeared like a purple-blue silk strip winding across the sky. Emil saw this scene for the first time, silently watching, his heart filled with pride. He suddenly understood why his father could not leave the sea, a harsh place but also a sacred place where souls reside. The third day was the biggest day of fishing. After 6 hours of continuous trawling, they caught nearly 18 tons of fish, mostly adult cod. They used knives to cut open the fish on board, took out the livers and eggs, and sorted them immediately. The livers were kept separately for oil, and the eggs were exported to Japan. Every part of the fish was valuable, and no one allowed themselves to be wasted. Lars wrote the logbook by hand, like his grandfather did. January 11 to 31 tons of fish in 3 trawls. Waves were force 4. Emil operated the tractor very well. Henrik slipped but was okay. Aurora, missing mom, Havin sailed through the storm like a steel knight, cutting through the white waves. Emil steered the ship following his father's instructions, his hands shaking with cold and tension. When they reached Husøy harbor at dawn, the whole village was waiting. They knew the storm was coming and were worried. The ship's whistle blew, followed by waving hands and tears of relief. The catch would be enough for the whole village to export for 2 weeks. Emil was handed the keys to the ship by his father, a wordless ritual, but as sacred as a rite of passage. The next day, the whole village slaughtered the fish together. Children learned how to sort. Women salted and packaged the fish. And old men told stories of the sea. Husøy was not rich, but they never lacked food or went hungry. The sea had given them everything: fish, tradition, memories and courage. Lars and Emil's story is not just their own, but a slice of the life of Northern European fishermen, people who live in the snow and wind, trade fish for life, and keep the sea as part of their flesh and blood. Despite modern machinery, satellites, or freezing technology, what keeps the Havin ship alive at sea is still the spirit of solidarity. The experience of their ancestors, and the love of the sea that reaches deep into their bones. When spring comes, the snow gradually melts, the herring return to the coastal waters to spawn, and then one early morning, Lars and Emil step back on the ship, cast their nets again, face the strong wind again, and continue the endless story between people and the sea, a place that is not only a place to make a living, but also a place where souls are cleansed, tested, and matured. Havin once again leaves port when the fog still covers the sea. The spring wind blows gently, carrying the cold of the end of the season. The nets were carefully inspected, the seams were hand-reinforced, and the engines were filled with oil. There was no music, no farewell party, just the deep hum of the engine and the familiar glances of those who knew that the sea never waited for anyone. Emil had grown accustomed to steering the boat while Lars stood behind him. silently observing his son's every move. Like a teacher with patience and a stern gaze, Henrik remained tough and quiet, but never lazy, and Jorgen, the old cook, continued to cook sea-scented meals of potatoes, halibut stew, and coffee so strong it could warm a cold winter night. The boat headed south, where the herring signal was picked up by satellite. Spring herring came in warm currents, in huge schools of silver, and if pulled at the right time, a trip could yield dozens of tons of fish in a single night. But herring are fast, and only experienced fishermen can read the subtle changes in the current. The subtle movements under the moonlit sea. They cast their nets in the middle of the night. This was not a bottom trawl, but a purse seine, a huge ring of net that was cast around the fish and then slowly pulled back with cameras. Emil and Henrik monitored the radar and infrared cameras. They saw the silvery glints, the sign of a huge school of herring circling the area. Point A14, heading west-northwest. Henrik shouted. Lars adjusted the course. The boat turned like a kite on the water. The net was cast precisely to the meter. Each line sank deep into the water. When the net was drawn in, the slapping of fish echoed across the deck. The silvery herring danced in the cold air as if trying to escape their fate. The cranes worked tirelessly, dumping the fish into large tanks and transferring them to cold storage. No one slept. Everyone's eyes were red, but their mouths kept telling stories. Emil said he had read an article that fish could sense each other's fear. And Jorgen mumbled that herring were clever, they always moved in spirals to fool their enemies. In the early morning, when the fog lifted, the sea opened up to a deep blue. Seabirds began to circle the ship, waiting for the discarded fish scraps. They were the silent companions of fishermen when they saw a flock of birds. People knew there were fish. When they didn't, people looked at each other, silent. That was the story of the sea, a series of small signals. Faint signs that only those who had spent their lives at sea could understand. The ship returned to Hussoy at dusk. The harbor whistle sounded to signal a safe return. The crates of herring were brought ashore, divided among the processing plants. Some for export, the rest for traditional dry salting. Emil saw his mother. She was standing on the shore, smiling and waving, her eyes warm as the late afternoon sun. Although she had never been to sea, she had always been the one who kept the fire burning in the small wooden house at the end of the village, the place where every fisherman looked forward to returning. A week later, the sea was calm, and Havin set sail again. The cod season was over, but the flounder season was coming. The flat fish, like large leaves, lay deep in the sand, hard to catch and difficult to preserve. This time they went further, near the Greenland Sea, where there were strong currents and dangerous reefs. Henrik was seasick but still smiled, saying that those who lived by the sea could not be weak-hearted. .5.951.5.00. Emil learned to adjust the net to the sandy bottom, and Lars wrote in a small, careful diary like a silent chronicler. The summer sea was not pleasant. The sun never set, making people lose track of time. Sometimes they worked 20 hours a day without realizing it. Coffee, cigarettes, and jokes were the only things that kept them sane. Jorgen said, "People think summer is easy, but in fact, it's the constant light that wears you out." He was right. There was no night, and no dreams. In the middle of the trip, a storm suddenly came. The radar had not warned. A huge wave hit unexpectedly, causing the ship to list sharply to one side. A net was swept away, and Henrik almost fell off the deck if he had not grabbed the railing. Emil had seen the real fury of the sea for the first time. He was shaking, his heart pounding, but Lars only said one sentence: "This is what men have to face." Emil did not reply, but he understood that what kept the ship afloat was not just the steel, but the unyielding spirit of the men who steered it. When the storm passed, the sea was calm again. The sky opened up a strange pink-orange. No one spoke. Each poured himself a cup of hot coffee, looking into the distance. In the hold, the flounders still lay still on the cold ice, as if the storm had never happened. But in the hearts of the people, the traces of the storm were still there, like the life lessons the sea taught. Without words,